66%, 34%. That's how Mr. Macron defeated Ms. Le Pen. Is that a sweeping victory if you are looking at the prospect that probably the latter is going to establish the largest opposition party?
Well, as you have mentioned earlier in your short program, it is a historic result for Marine Le Pen's movement. It's historically high. More than 10 million French people voted for the far-right movement in the second round of the election. So she has many reasons for being satisfied of that election, considering that, let's face it, she had a very, very narrow chance of winning that election. So that result is already of a huge satisfaction for her. On the other side, we have to be quite satisfied with Macron's result, considering that overall he had more voters than François Hollande 5 years ago. So yes, it could have been better, but it's already a significant number of voters. And I do believe that this is a message sent not only to the rest of the world, and he made it clear in his speech that you have also mentioned in your program, but he also made it clear to the French voters for the coming legislative election in 5 weeks from now.
Yes. It is going to be quite interesting if you're looking at the upcoming elections. The seats in the parliament, how is it likely to be fought out? Mr. Cui, with the presidential election result, how do you think that's likely to be?
Yes, I think that maybe we can find out perhaps the two tendencies for the forthcoming legislative election in June. Because as we know, once this, I think, division among the mainstream party or some, very, very difficult choices for average people, perhaps it will have another, I think, maybe a disordered situation happen in June for this parliamentary election. Because as we know so far, for the mainstream parties, even they lost in the presidential election, but now they got preparation for the parliamentary election. And also at the same time, another very big question for Mr. Macron or President Macron is how could he lead her very, very young party to go into this, I think, a competition for this legislative election.
But many wonder whether it is really a young party, Mr. Gouvernement, because it is a party, of course, being established just for 1 year, and yet you see many of the backbone personnel in this party have been with so-called establishment parties for a long time, and centrist is nothing new to France, I guess, for some years. So is it going to be fresh new, or actually they're going to tread some of the previously well-established roads?
Well, I think this is really the big question at the moment, and Mr. Cui raised that very important point, how to lead a country with a country that virtually does not exist. We have to remind our audience that right now, En Marche, Macron's movement, has absolutely no parliament seats. So he has to gain a majority out of nowhere, out of nothing. So it will be his first and extremely difficult task in the next 5 weeks to manage to get a majority out of course, the will of several people who will join his movement. And of course, we observe a significant number of people joining his movement, not only the civil society, but also some political actors from various parties. But he will also have notably by joining a government, by shaping a government that responds to the expectations of the majority of the people, he will have to make sure that he will gain supporters from the right and the left. And of course, that will be his first challenge as a president.
Mr. Gouvernement, he talked about the president now, Macron, a new page for France history. That's, of course, easier said than done. What kind of page is that? Is it going to be an exciting page, or is it going to be a so-so page? And meanwhile, what is likely to be on his agenda, given that the populist movement is still quite high in Europe, and also the economy, that is the central issue. Mr. Gouvernement, do you see any signs that he might do something dramatic?
Well, that's a very important question. I believe that this election brings a lot of symbols. You have mentioned the age, extremely young age of France's new president. He's the youngest president in France's history. He is also the youngest leader of the G20 and one of the youngest leaders in the world at the moment. So this is a very important symbol of the youth, a new generation of leaders taking power in Western democracy. So this is a very important symbol, and we could feel in Paris last night after the result this sort of sense of hope among the population, hope for something new, some new generation of leaders sweeping out this old establishment. So this is really something that we can expect from
you probably could
this
say
new
that,
government
Mr. Gourmand.
and
You
this
probably
new
could say that
tendency. On the other side,
the age probably is an issue, but you know, when you look at President Obama, when you look at the Canadian Prime Minister, they're already the new generation on the horizon for quite some time. The real thing is whether President Macron is really like to come up with something. I mean, centrist, that's what his party is all about, quote unquote. That means internationalism, that means pro-Europeanism, that means not necessarily going to the extremes on many of the social issues as well. So Blairism, you know, just you can throw all of these isms onto his shoulder, but will he be able to follow that in a very different circumstances? That's a question. Very briefly from you, Mr. Gourmand.
Yes, that's a very important point here. Yes, he is young, but the question is politics going to be young also? Is it going to be new, or is it going to be exactly like what we have observed in the past 30 years? And this is what his opponents are already accusing him of. They say, well, you're young, but your politics are not. So this is really the challenge for Mr. Macron, trying to provide something new, trying to create some new hope and some new movement in this country. It's going to be a very difficult task. And of course, the choice of the Prime Minister and the members of the government will be already giving some signs, some elements to understand what exactly is going on. But I believe, to answer your question in a little bit more detail on a very important point, that Macron has been focusing a lot on the importance of European Union and the implications of France within European Union. He will meet with Angela Merkel just a few days after he is officially the president of France. He will join a NATO summit just a few weeks later, and also a G7 summit. And we will see, I believe, during these different events, what sort of tendency he wants to give to his governance, at least at the beginning of his presidency.
Right, Mr. Cui, here comes the critical moment, isn't it? It is not just the campaigning, this is the governing moment, and that is when the truth really comes out.
Yes, exactly. I think that now there will be some more, there will be some bigger challenges facing to the new president or young president or new government in future. Because also besides this very, very difficult issue in security, economy, and immigration, some other. And also now I think the biggest challenge for this new president and his new party is how to deal with some systemic or some mechanism issue. Especially just like our French guest mentioned that yes, they will, Mr. Macron will try to provide some more hope. But I think that now the French people, they lack not only, what they lack not only the feeling or of hope, they want to some more maybe practical change, especially by the new president, the new government. But now I think that maybe the big question for France and for French government is how to take the steps and to decide the proper timing and how to decide the priorities, especially in a very, very difficult time.
Priority is extremely important, and also important is the early harvest. As people are looking at change, they expect immediate results. They want to be satisfied. just as on social media these days, people want to have immediate response from a new government. Can that be done, Mr. Gouvernement? We have already seen President Trump from the United States and also Chancellor Angela Merkel from Germany congratulate President Macron in big way and willing to work with him. But willing to work with him, what does that mean? We don't know. Also, international environment could be quite important for him, Mr. Gouvernement.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do totally agree on the fact that the French voters won't let any time to Mr. Macron to provide some responses to what they really want, what they really need. He will have to be efficient, he will have to be quick, he will have to be probably immediate on some particular points. So yes, he has to face enormous challenges, and I think this is why he took this decision to meet Madame Merkel as soon as possible. They have to think together new ways to reboost European Union, new ways to somehow give a new trajectory to the European construction. And this is probably
what could be some of these new ways, Mr. Gouvernement,
on both international and domestic issues.
Mr. Gouvernement, what could be some of these new ways that you just mentioned? Any inspirations at this point?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, you know that France and Germany have been somehow a little bit diverging in the past few years on how to stimulate the European economy. And of course, this election in France was regarded as some sort of test for what kind of a proposal exactly we are going to provide within this European Union. Is France going to be one of the leaders, or is it going to quit, not the European Union, of course, but its responsibilities within the Union? And I believe that the message sent by the election of Mr. Macron and his speech, again, his speech last night was extremely important. He mentioned European Union several times. He used the ode to joy, the European anthem to enter the Louvre Palace just before he made his speech. And all these symbols, along with the fact that during his campaign he repeatedly announced his strong attachment to the European values, to the European construction, to the defense of the euro as well. And I believe that this is really where he can provide some new not way exactly, but some new attachment of France to the European construction. And this is exactly what our European partners are expecting from France right now.
Well, that may be what partners are expecting from other countries, but what about the voters here in France? The major labor issues, of course, has been facing France right now. Mr. Cui, do you think these old tricks, as some say, going to the core values of European Union and one Europe and one euro, will that likely to solve the latest problem? Old tricks solve the latest problems?
Yes, I think that according to Mr. Macron's commitment, he regarded himself as a pro-globalization, pro-European integration figure. But now I think that if we look at some issues practically, we can find that firstly, once Mr. Macron wants to play a more positive role in European integration and in promoting especially this confidence from other member states to European Union, firstly, he should try to keep a very good relations, especially in work with his counterpart in Germany, because as we know always, this the co-dynamic for European integration of this cooperation between France and Germany. But another question I think that every kind of effort from France, from President Macron, to try to restart or energy this European integration, the France should deal with firstly its own economic issue, its own economic development issue. Because as we know, once there is a weaker and weaker French economy in Europe, it will, I think, it will do nothing to help the
he has to deal with the economic
credibility
issues
of France.
But the question is really, the question
yes.
really is how. That's exactly what I'm trying to ask from both of you. It seems that there are still a lot of brainstorming going on before we reach any kinds of inspiration, it seems. But gentlemen, let me ask you a question from another direction. That is, you know, really, is it populism is rising up in a dramatic way in Europe? Really? After the Brexit, we see Netherlands election. Populism did not win the majority. Now we see another election here in France. It seems that that's the case too. So the coming up German election, many say this is already a boost giving to German Chancellor Angela Merkel. So the fear of the rise of populism, is that really true to a full extent, Mr. Bourgmont?
Well, that's a tricky question, of course. I mean, if you observe the rise of some extremist movements and also new sort of movements, we can answer yes. And as a matter of fact, the emergence of Macron is one of them. We must remind the audience that Macron was totally unknown to the French public only 3 years ago, before he became François Hollande's Minister of the Economy. And his emergence has been extremely fast, based on a party that virtually doesn't exist. It's not even a party, it's just a movement. So it is a part of this populism, centered populism in that case. Right. But it is somehow some tendency that we have observed through Europe in the past few years. But on the other side, we may consider that probably the biggest issue in Europe at the moment is not much the emergence of new sort of parties, but the difficulties that the so-called traditional parties are facing. And in France's election, we have observed that both the Républicain and the Socialist Party, these parties that have led France for the past 50 years, if not more, did not even qualify to the second round of the election. And this is probably the biggest lesson of this election. There's something new, there's some new expectations from the French public opinion. Yeah. And this is indeed something that we have also observed in other European countries, with different results, of course, and Brexit is one of them.
We'll see what's going to happen. Meanwhile, another phenomenon out of this election, that is, once you catches the eyeballs, you're going to go to the final rounds. That's true for Mrs. Le Pen. That is also true for Mr. Macron, given his very atypical family situation. And that has been widely reported in the press. So, Mr. Cui, is that really the nature of our elections these days in democracies that we have witnessed recently? Both Mr. Trump and now we see Mr. Macron as well. Eyeballs means votes, is it, Mr. Cui?
Oh, yes, I think that now maybe a very big question now for this recent, especially Western democracy is how could we make clear the division or dividing line between the democracy and the populist? Because also because of the internet, because of globalization, certainly there will be a more and more or bigger requirement for this face-to-face exchange, especially by this new media instrument, especially for some politicians to introduce them their ways to spread their commitments to average people, everything. But now I think that perhaps the big challenge now for this so-called Western democracy is how could try to play, especially for the elite, play a leading role, or maybe in a responsible way to help average people to understand what will happen once they choose some politicians. They're just good at to show them their ways, but they lack of some very, I think, good thinking about their policy, about the future of the nation and the country. I think it would be a very big question, not only for now, for this moment, and also for future.
Mr. Bourgmont, on a lighter note, and my final question for you as well, this first family now is certainly atypical according to some media commentaries. It seems there's a lot of, pressure, it seems, to make everything work for this first family in front of the rest of the world. Is it?
Well, there is a lot of pressure. I believe that there's a lot of expectations about this election. And for the first time, this election has been followed in the rest of the world with extremely high attention. And I think the context plays a very significant role. We have mentioned the Brexit. We have mentioned Trump's election. We have mentioned also the so-called fake news that somehow disrupted this campaign. It has been a dirty campaign to some extent. And indeed, there are many expectations about what will be France's move now that the voters have indeed rejected populism and the rise of extremist movements. So what will be the lessons to the rest of the world? What will be also France's commitment in many issues? Emmanuel Macron has mentioned last night after his victory France's commitment to the climate change initiatives and especially the Paris Treaty. He has also mentioned European Union. We talked about that earlier. He has also mentioned the strong attachment to particular global values, including security, including providing some assistance to people in need. So that will be extremely important to see in the following weeks what will be exactly the possibility for the new government to put into action all these promises.